Orbit breach in Sector 7. 12 human crafts attempting retreat. Minimal threat, Commander Ralvec muttered, eyes narrowing as the display traced thin white arcs moving erratically below. Scrape them from the sky. The order cracked across the command deck like an executioner's blade. Within seconds, the spearhead of the Xanthian fleet responded, 26 obelisks of obsidian fire cutting down through Earth's thermosphere like avenging titans. Below, the last shreds of blue atmosphere boiled and peeled, leaving only crimson trails and seared air behind. Ralvec didn't flinch as the laser plasma displays flickered, adjusting to account for the heat bloom. His tall, ridged helm cast a stretched shadow across the command bay's steelwork floor, warping as the world below burned. "They always try to run," he said, barely a whisper. The bridge was silent except for the staccato cadence of command relays and tactical updates streaming through subaudible channels. The crew, motionless at their stations, resembled statues carved from black stone. Only their flickering eye implants betrayed movement, parsing endless data at light speed. Ralvec stepped forward, gloved hand resting briefly on the edge of the navigation console. He stared down at the blue-green sphere below, now partially obscured by smoke columns and rising firestorms. Cities had become latticeworks of glowing veins, each rupture in the Earth's skin opening wider by the hour. A scent, not of fire or oil, but of overcharged coolant and ionic discharge, seeped through the ventilation as the fleet's kinetic barriers absorbed the last of Earth's orbital mines. One final sting from a dying world. Planetary resistance is below statistical significance, the fleet AI announced in its sterile cadence. Projected full compliance in 31 minutes. Too long, Ralvec snapped. Accelerate the conversion sequence. No monuments, no survivors. At the far end of the bridge, an adjutant lifted his gaze. Young, twitchy, still flinching at heat flares from the view screens. Sub-Commander Trevax, unproven, but observant. He hesitated. Then, careful not to challenge, he spoke. "There's something strange in the relay data from New Thessar. Civilian biosigns dropped to 0 in under a second. No heat spike, no movement, just gone." Ralvec turned his head slightly, not blinking. "Visual confirmation." "None, sir. Surveillance assets in that sector are looped. Playback won't resolve." Ralvec's brow lowered, a near imperceptible fold tightening along his jaw. "Faulty transmission. Send another drone. Strip the delay from the feed. If they're hiding, we'll peel the rock itself open." But even as the new drone launched, another anomaly whispered into the feed, this one from the ruins of Kyoto. Destroyed in the initial barrage, its ground-level architecture now a crater, 5 kilometers wide. Yet somehow, the debris pattern had shifted. No seismic trigger, no aftershock, just altered, as if time itself had flinched. Earth's surface, from orbit, resembled a ritual scarring, a spiral of wounds spreading across the crust in a pattern, not of chaos, but of something colder. Ralvec recognized patterns. That was his strength. He saw symbols in data, movements in stillness. This pattern didn't belong to nature. Forward units have encountered zero resistance in Central Eurasia. Entire regions abandoned. Scanners detect residual EM fields, inconsistent with pre-existing weaponry. Ralvec's lip curled. "Civilians are irrelevant. Finish the sweep. Initiate the planetary compliance broadcast. All over Earth surviving infrastructure, satellite towers, orbital buoys, even submerged oceanic repeaters, were hijacked." Within minutes, the Xanthion emblem, a burning spiral within a fractured eye, was projected across every usable frequency. "We are the order above chaos. Submit, and your survival may be considered." The message repeated every 30 seconds, an echo, cold, final. Tarn Veric sat inside a command bunker deep beneath what remained of the North American defense array. Blood dried in a branching map across his temple. The steel of the walls groaned as if Earth itself were breathing its last. He didn't speak. His officers waited. Finally, he looked up, placing a data shard into the central relay. His voice was flat. "All units, you will not respond. You will not fire. You will not move. Operation Vexus is initiated. Authority ends with me." Gasps rose like sparks. One man stepped forward, fists clenched, tears in his eyes. "Sir General, this is suicide." "No," Veric said. This is surrendering our command to something that no longer answers to men. He opened his hand. Inside his palm, a white circle pulsed once faint, deliberate. Then it dimmed, and with it, the lights in the bunker flickered, not from power failure, but something else. A kind of pause, a breath being held by the world. From above, the compliance broadcast faltered. Ralvec scowled. What is this? The laser plasma displays stuttered. Static jittered into existence, across the command deck. Then something stranger, a fragment of an audio file, corrupted and incomplete, crackled through. Said him again. He was in same alley, same blood, same. He smiled, like before. No origin, no timestamp, no speaker identified. Ralvec turned to his adjutant. Explain. I don't know. It wasn't in the command script. Sir, look, on the main display, the burn scars on Earth's surface were gone, not faded, gone, as if they had never been carved. Ralvec's heart, if such a thing still beat behind his exoskeletal plating, paused. Impossible. Reset all orbital telemetry. Overlay the sequence from initial strike to now. They did, and it didn't align. The destruction no longer followed the trajectory of the original fleet bombardment. It followed a spiral, the same spiral, but inverted. In the remains of Geneva, a single human walked alone across cracked stone. His name was Eric Soren. He had died 12 minutes ago. He walked calmly, a blood stain curling across his shirt like ivy. His eyes held no fear, only memory, faint, fragmented, but there. He glanced upward, toward the burning sky, and whispered, "They never learn." Ralvec's command vessel, the Harbinger, shuddered. The ship had not been struck, no impact, no attack, but every sensor lit red, all at once. Multiple target locks detected. Someone screamed. From where? Ralvec demanded. Silence. Then behind Earth's dead moon, shadows moved. Ships human design, hybrid cores, previously destroyed in the opening battle, rose from the dark side like resurrected phantoms. The Eidolon fleet, 37 vessels, none should exist. All hands, Ralvec said slowly, prepare for return fire. But the fleet didn't fire. It watched, and as it watched, time folded. Far below, in the ruins of Tharsis Ridge, beneath red soil and forgotten labs, a signal pulsed from a forgotten chamber. Operation Vexus had activated, and nothing would ever be linear again. Why aren't they retaliating? Ralvec's voice cut through the tension like a blade pressed against frost. No one answered. From the command cradle aboard the Harbinger, the fleet's spearhead vessel, his eyes tracked the curve of Earth spinning slowly beneath them. The world no longer screamed. There was no smoke rising, no counterfire from defensive systems. The skies were empty, like lungs that had forgotten how to draw breath. 100 lenses locked onto Earth's terrain, zooming through ravaged cityscapes and hollowed terrain. What they found wasn't resistance, it was vacancy. Streets that once roared with movement were frozen in abandonment. Roads stretched into silence. Entire regions glowed under infrared but displayed no signs of motion. Confirmed thermal patterns over Sector Iota 9, Ralvec said, leaning toward the nearest heads-up interface. That's where their primary command structure used to be. Confirmed, Commander, came the voice of a junior technician. Same result, no movement, no signature variations. Flatline across all metrics. Ralvec's jaw tensed. There was no challenge in the data, no provocation, no surviving battalion clawing for survival. Even their static defenses, once bristling with shield towers and kinetic artillery, had been reduced to skeletal frameworks, charred ribs of an ancient machine, pointing toward nothing. The assault logs confirmed over 80% devastation. The remaining 20% was unresponsive, not jammed, not encrypted, just quiet. The quiet didn't comfort him. Scan deeper, he said. Geothermal registers, radiation levels. I want ground saturation patterns. The technician hesitated. We've already run that, sir. Ralvec turned his head slowly, then run it again. Behind him the command deck seemed heavier than usual, not louder, just slower. Each officer's movement lagged behind intent, as if thought itself had thickened. Trevax, now pacing behind the auxiliary monitors, stopped. There's something wrong with the light, he said under his breath. Ralvec ignored it at first, then noticed it too, the way shadows fell at slightly odd angles. The sunlight bouncing off the Earth's surface shifted shade too often, as if the planet's surface had forgotten which hour it belonged to. The central console pulsed once, an alert from the excavation crew on the Martian uplink. Something about an anomaly in their temporal logs. Postpone Martian matters. Focus on Earth, Ralvec said, gesturing it away. But it didn't vanish. Instead, the same alert popped up again, this time accompanied by an internal timestamp that didn't match fleet chronology. It's looping, Trevax whispered. The feed, it's not updating. It's stuck in a single moment. Ralvec clenched a fist. Impossible. The system runs chron-linear diagnostics. It would alert on stasis. It did, sir. Another officer spoke from the far side of the deck. 52 minutes ago. Then it erased the alert, then reissued it, then paused. On Earth, silence wasn't absence. It had form. A breeze moved through empty skyscrapers, fluttering paper and buildings that hadn't had power in days. Clock towers stood frozen. Every one of them halted at the same second. 4 hours, 7 minutes and 12 seconds. In the shattered remains of Johannesburg's core, heat lingered without smoke. A soldier's helmet lay cracked beside an abandoned railgun, yet the blood beneath it hadn't dried or spread. It simply existed, suspended in shape and hue, like a memory etched in wax. A small drone buzzed through the ruins, scanning for bio-traces. It passed through what once was a market street, and returned to its ship with no readout. But when the footage was replayed back on the Harbinger, a child's face flickered into the corner of one frame. No body, no movement, just a blurred expression, and then gone. Ralvec reviewed it 3 times. Each viewing, the child's head turned slightly more toward the camera. He did not speak of it aloud. What of Thane Merox? He asked, changing tack. The scientist, the architect of their defense grid. Confirm his status. Last known location was the subsurface complex beneath the Siberian cradle. Surveillance records end the moment our first bombardment hit the area. No death confirmed, no visuals since. Then we assume he lives. The AI processed that for a moment too long before answering. We cannot confirm. Ralvec didn't need confirmation. The unease beneath his ribs was already building into something tactile. A sensation like standing inside a sealed room with mirrors for walls, where no sound could escape, and every reflection showed the back of your own head. Why destroy themselves so quickly? Trevax asked aloud. We offered surrender. We gave the speech, the protocol. Humans don't burn their cities unless they have a reason, Ralvec murmured, almost to himself, or unless they need us to see it. You think this was staged? I think we walked into a story written by someone else. He turned to the helm. How many fleet units experienced equipment disruption? 17. Mostly visual feed loops, a few timeline inconsistencies in battlefield logs. Timeline inconsistencies, Ralvec repeated slowly. Yes, sir. One drone recorded the fall of Thesser 4 times, each time from a different altitude. The bridge fell quiet again. Trevax's fingers tapped nervously against the console. This isn't war, this is theater. Ralvec shook his head. No, it's not for our benefit. They're not performing. Then who are they showing this to? No one answered. A shadow moved across the view screen as Earth's Terminator line swept west. Night began to fall over the Pacific, but not normally, not with a steady dimming. It was as if the ocean had simply ceased to reflect. The stars above the curve of the planet didn't shimmer. They flickered, then blinked off entirely, one by one. Far beneath Greenland's ice shelf, in what used to be a monitoring station, something blinked to life. A single console lit up. No human touched it. No program had been scheduled to run. The screen displayed only one thing, a date, then a time, then it rewound. By 5 minutes, then again. The lights in the room dimmed to black. Ralvec stepped toward the center display, eyes never leaving the blue sphere that had grown darker than it should have. Bring me the last recorded voice transmission from their command chain. We've already scanned everything, Trevax began, but stopped when a new file appeared unprompted in the queue. Play it, Ralvec ordered. It started as static, then faintly a voice, male, older, calm. You're not watching Earth, you're watching your memory of it. Ralvec's breath caught. This isn't defense, this is adaptation. You already lost, we're just showing you why. The feed cut. Ralvec turned away from the screen. His fingers curled slowly at his sides. the fabric of his gloves creaking. Seal the outer sectors, full perimeter, no ships in, no ships out. I want this world isolated from the stars. Commander, Trevax asked, swallowing. What do we do if they're not there anymore? Ralvec's eyes narrowed. Then we find out where they went. Commander, we have re-entered Earth's orbital perimeter. Ralvec turned sharply from the side console, brow furrowing beneath his command helm. Re-entered? We never left. The crew aboard the Harbinger exchanged uncertain glances, yet the telemetry feed painted a different story, one that shouldn't exist. Their current position aligned perfectly with the timestamp from the original invasion, altitude, trajectory. Even the debris field from the fallen Juno's edge, a Xanthian cruiser lost in the first atmospheric push, appeared untouched, suspended in space like a corpse, still holding its breath. Display archived battle footage alongside real-time visuals, Ralvec ordered. Both feeds began rolling across the dual laser plasma interfaces. The images were identical, down to the rotation of ash spiraling from the stratosphere, the jagged skyline of a broken Mumbai, and the precise placement of civilian transports scorched mid-air. Even the clouds moved the same. No variation, no randomness. This isn't a replay, whispered Trevax. This is repetition. Ralvec's fingers tightened against the console. This isn't how time works. On the ground, the first landing unit breached the ruins of New Thessar for the third time. Private Dren hesitated as his boot crunched on shattered tile. The mural on the northern wall, once vibrant with depictions of Earth's early starships, remained intact again. He could have sworn it had collapsed during their second sweep. But there it was, uncracked, painted in colors that somehow seemed more vivid than before. His visor HUD flickered as he scanned it, picking up anomalous readings in the pigment spectrum. When he turned to call for confirmation, his squad was already gone again. He was alone, and the sky, which had been dusk, was suddenly noon. Back on the Harbinger, Ralvec stared at the logs piling into the system. How many cycles? Unknown, said the AI. How can that be unknown? Each replay overwrites the previous logs, while preserving memory references. Trevax's voice was tight. Then we've been here more than twice. A silence fell. Ralvec ordered a full diagnostic sweep of the onboard systems. What returned wasn't a malfunction report, it was a reflection, literally. A looped feed of the crew performing diagnostics, running identically from earlier. One of the techs even scratched the same point on his temple, on cue, unaware he'd done it before. Cut the visual, Ralvec muttered. It wouldn't cut. The ship, in its entirety, was functioning like a memory playing itself back in real time. Somewhere in the Eurasian ruins, beneath a fractured monument, Eric Solren staggered through shifting ash. He felt everything, wind that carried no scent, pain from injuries he had no recollection of earning, a heartbeat that didn't sync with the rhythm of time around him. He stopped by a collapsed archway, where his name had been etched in stone. It hadn't been there the first time. Or had it? He read it slowly. He will wake in the place he died. That's when the echoes began. Footsteps. His own, coming from a different direction. Eric turned a corner and found himself staring at his own back. A younger version, blood still fresh, eyes wide, moments from death. The other Eric didn't see him. He just walked forward, into the same alley, toward the drone that had killed him during the first assault. Except now, the drone was gone. The alley ended in silence. On board the Harbinger, Ralvec attempted to reset all visual processing units. He instructed the AI to isolate and compress repeating sequences. That's when the message appeared. No source, no header, just 3 words across every heads-up display. This is iteration, followed by another line. You are teaching us. Who wrote that? Ralvec barked. No one answered. Trevax's hands hovered over the console, lips parted. This isn't enemy interference, sir. This feels like feedback. Ralvec approached the nearest plasma panel and rewound the visual logs. He stopped at the exact moment Earth's orbital ring was breached during the first assault, then advanced frame by frame. The moment the first Xanthion warhead struck, flashing white over the Andes, the light fractured, like cracked glass, and behind it briefly, a face, human, smiling. In the airspace above Cairo's remains, a firestorm bloomed, then reversed. The explosion drew inward, flames curling back into the origin point, broken buildings lifting into the air like rewinded wreckage. Soldiers blinked and found themselves whole again, wounds sealed, ammo clips full. One of them screamed in confusion, and was silenced by his own voice from behind him, repeating the exact same scream in delayed harmony. The landscape was folding back on itself, but only slightly, only just enough to be wrong. Ralvec no longer relied on logic. It had betrayed him. He summoned all command logs across the fleet, and ran a full comparative simulation. The result? 5 full looped sequences detected, each bearing microscopic differences, slightly altered fleet formations, ground units standing in different postures, a cloud formation inverting spin direction. Vexus, he muttered. It wasn't confirmation. It was intuition. A name once whispered in strategy briefings. A myth buried in Earth's secret projects. Find Thane Merox, he ordered. He built this. Trevax didn't move. Commander, we already tried. Ralvec turned to him sharply. I know, Trevax continued. But the request came from you. In the last loop, Ralvec stared at him. You said the same thing. The same words. Same tone. At the edge of Earth's exosphere, another fleet entered from slipspace. Exantheon reinforcements unaware of the cycles. They fired on coordinates marked by the lead fleet. Coordinates now devoid of targets. Their munitions struck open land. No resistance. No enemy positions. No survivors. Then they received a broadcast. Audio only. A voice that didn't speak, just breathed. The pattern of breath spelled out code. Morse. Ancient human syntax. You are repeating failure. Then silence. The reinforcements tried to re-engage their own command network. The connection was denied. By themselves. On board the Harbinger, the internal temperature dropped sharply. Condensation formed on the command deck floor in circular patches. The lights dimmed as if the ship itself were being drained from within. Then every interface displayed the same feed. Eric Solren, alive, standing alone in a corridor deep beneath Earth's surface. The timestamp placed the footage 2 loops ago, yet it streamed in real time. He looked up, and spoke directly to the camera. We remember you. Ralvec stepped back. He had seen this man die. Twice. And yet, here he was, delivering a message from a different point in a loop no longer aligned with theirs. End this cycle, Eric whispered, or we will rewrite you. The screen shut off. No alarms triggered. No AI warnings. No alerts. Just a low mechanical ticking, echoing through the ship's ventilation shafts. A rhythm that didn't match any system clock. Ralvec stood alone at the helm, watching Earth rotate beneath them. He no longer knew what day it was, or whether it mattered. He's turning left this time. Eric Solren stood beside a shattered wall, boot pressing into glass half buried in dust. The child with the broken drone, he'd seen him a dozen loops ago, was no longer walking into the same ambush. This time, the boy hesitated, glanced right, and moved opposite the alley where the sniper used to wait. Eric didn't call out. He didn't breathe. His memory wasn't whole, but it was enough. Blood no longer surprised him. What rattled him was how quickly he stopped mourning it. He turned away as the red scarf, his own, fluttered against the breeze, tangled in a charred wire above the street. He hadn't been wearing it this time, but it always returned, like a signature. Mark the wall, he whispered, drawing a triangle with the edge of a bent nail against the stone. If I wake again, I'll know I was here. A jagged cough echoed from beneath the nearby rubble. Eric didn't flinch. He already knew who it was. In an underground compound deep beneath fractured ice, General Tarn Veric reviewed a live feed of Unit 9C, the same fire team that had died during the 3rd atmospheric breach. This time, they held the perimeter longer. 2 more minutes, a different formation, flanking instead of charging. 1 drone neutralized, 2 survived. Every loop, they lasted longer. He pressed 2 fingers against the console's edge. His hand no longer trembled, not from fatigue, but from restraint. You knew, he muttered to no one. You built this to learn. Behind him, a technician adjusted a visual overlay on the left side plasma stream. Sir, we're tracking behavioral divergence in 3 units. One of them, Solren, is showing memory indicators across sequences. Same phrases, different timestamps. Same gestures, same object retrieval. Veric turned, locking eyes with the tech. He's remembering. The man hesitated. He's adapting. Veric didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned back toward the main feed, where Eric sprinted across a corridor, timing his movement between automated turret sweeps with impossible timing. The old soldier exhaled once. Then it's working. In the dry corridors beneath Argentina's broken crust, Eric stood before a shattered mirror, one that never repaired between cycles. His reflection was always slightly different. Today his hands bore no scars. Yesterday, they had. He reached toward the fractured pane, brushing his fingertips against a fissure that carved through his own face. The cold bit back, not with temperature, but with memory. "You again," he said softly. There was no reply, but the glass shifted, only once. Earth's resistance no longer followed military structure, it followed rhythm. Civilians once too scattered to fight were now coordinating, with an elegance born not from training, but from observation. One group rigged tripwire lures using wires they shouldn't have known about. Another disabled a Xanthion walker by collapsing the ceiling at exactly the right moment, a tactic no human had ever attempted, but which aligned with an explosion pattern from 4 iterations ago. The patterns were not taught, they were inherited. In the command chamber beneath the Himalayas, Veric stood before a sealed vault. He placed his palm on the access panel. A line traced his veins with soft light. The door hissed sideways. Inside, buried beneath years of silence and fallback encryption, the Vexus core waited, suspended in a translucent obelisk, as if submerged in liquid time. "I've led them as far as I can," Veric said aloud. "Now it's yours." No reply came, but every light in the chamber blinked once, simultaneously, and when they stabilized, the wall behind him displayed a new symbol, a spiral, folded inward. Elsewhere, Eric knelt beside a wounded man. The soldier's breath rattled with fluid in his lungs. The last loop, Eric hadn't reached him in time. This time he had. He whispered, "You don't know me, but I've seen you die 6 times. The man tried to speak. "Save your voice. You've got 1 minute." Eric stood, peeled a datapad from the soldier's belt, and checked the coordinates. Sniper nest, rooftop. Next loop, he'd get there first. He looked skyward. No stars, just ash, a memory bleeding through. Then he moved, dragging the soldier toward the nearest corridor before the aerial strike could arrive. It didn't. Inside the Xanthion fleet, the dissonance became evident. Commander Ralvec no longer issued strategy orders. He reviewed them. Again and again, battle tactics formed by his own hand now contradicted themselves. Simultaneous successes and failures. Troop deployments landing in 2 separate places, hours apart, at the same timestamp. He watched footage of Solren dying, once from above, once from street level, then from a helmet cam that belonged to a unit that had never reported encountering him. 3 deaths, all different. One man, still alive. Ralvec leaned forward, tapping his gauntlet against the screen. "What are you becoming?" Tactical evolution accelerated on the ground. Survivors adjusted positions before the enemy even landed. Detour routes formed across collapsed terrain, guided by marks left from past selves. Sometimes, someone left a bullet casing in a tin pan. The sound would draw the drone's attention just long enough for someone else to cross unseen. One soldier created a map by burning images onto concrete with sunlight through broken lenses, seen only when the wind blew in the correct direction. These weren't instructions, these were memories wearing clothes. In a makeshift operations den inside a hollowed tram station, a boy placed a red scarf into a crate. Eric watched from the doorway, silent. "She told me to give it back to you," the boy said. Eric stepped forward. "Who?" The boy shrugged. "She didn't say. But she had your face, just older." Eric took the scarf and tied it around his wrist. The knot felt familiar, too familiar. He looked to the cracked ceiling above. Time was unraveling, and somehow, it was listening. General Veric stood alone outside the Vexus chamber, watching as the obelisk pulsed brighter with each new incident of human success. Tactical overlays began syncing with behavioral deviations before the acts occurred. Vexus was no longer reacting. It was shaping responses before they happened. Veric placed his hand on the cold glass. "It's your war now." The floor beneath him shimmered, just slightly, as if space had softened. And somewhere deep within the neural archive, A voice answered without sound. We are remembering through them. Eric Solren stood at the edge of a ridge, surveying the city below. It was different this time. The smoke curled differently. The ruins leaned opposite, but the color of the dust, the red hue on the west wall, that hadn't changed. He closed his eyes and saw it again. The drone strike, the scream, the silence, then the choice. He wouldn't make the same mistake this time. He turned, left the ridge, marked a stone, and walked into the next death, with a lesson carved into his stride. Because learning was no longer optional, it was encoded. Why is our flagship targeting our own rear detachment? The words came too fast to sound calm, but Commander Ralvec delivered them without raising his voice. His hands rested on the console edge, knuckles pale beneath the layer of battle greaves. Across the heads-up display, fleet movement shimmered in artificial reds and greens, now corrupted by the third yellow distortion this hour. A Xanthian destroyer had realigned its weapons grid, mid-pattern, and struck its own escort, with a rail burst meant for a phantom target. No enemy signal. Just a false tag. Ralvec's fleet AI attempted to course-correct the data, but the adjustment came too late. The escort spun out of orbit and broke apart in orbit, tearing across the vacuum like fractured obsidian, pulled through a magnetic field. He narrowed his eyes. Who injected the marker beacon? No one, Trevax replied from the adjacent terminal. Not from our command chain. We've triple verified. The tag was authenticated using your personal cipher. Ralvec didn't move. His reply came only after a pause that stretched too long. Then I've been duplicated. On board the Zareth Claw, one of the reinforcements dispatched from the outer colonies, navigator units initiated a full jump to rendezvous with the Earth occupation fleet. Countdown locked. Engines surged, coordinates aligned. 3, 2, 1. Then nothing. The ship didn't vanish. It didn't lurch forward. It flickered. The hull distorted inwards, then reversed, and in a blink, the Zareth Claw imploded without force, collapsing into a point no wider than a heartbeat. Command never received distress. But 6 minutes later, an identical ship reappeared in orbit above Neptune. Burned, twisted. Crew logs already marked as deceased on arrival. Ralvec began isolating command flow. One by one, he revoked layered access to navigational relays, disabled onboard fleet AIs, and moved strategic planning onto analog fallback arrays. But every time they rerouted the system, a secondary layer reinitiated the sabotage from a non-existent subdirectory, named using Earth military code structures, not seen since the Jupiter blockade 2 decades prior. It wasn't hacking, it was mimicry. Executed with such cold clarity, it suggested the saboteur had walked every corridor and listened to every breath. Lock out everything, Ralvec said. Even me. Trevax blinked. Sir, I said lock it. Inside the Harbinger's primary war coordination chamber, all fleet movements were projected onto a layered table of overlapping heads-up displays. Ralvec stared at the projection of Earth. 5 different versions of the planet rotated in quiet synchronization. Each bore small inconsistencies in terrain. Rivers shifted slightly. Coastlines blurred. A mountain that should have been there simply gone. Why are there 5? The mapping officer looked ill. They're bleed-over echoes, sir. They shouldn't exist, but they're pulling gravity. You're saying phantom planets are affecting real fleet movement. The officer didn't reply. Then we are already in their construct. In deep space traffic control, the destroyer Elthion's mark opened fire on a formation of patrol ships. No orders were issued, no provocation logged. Its targeting system had identified the patrol group as inbound Xanthian enemies, using tags borrowed from the rebel incursion on Farron Delta, years ago. Farron Delta had been erased from the star charts 3 decades prior. When Ralvec reviewed the weapon logs, he saw his own command authorization on every fire sequence. Ralvec stood at the edge of the command deck's observation bay, watching static distort the orbital layer. Ships flickered out of view without explanation. Others phased in where they shouldn't have been. He spoke without turning. I once believed control meant clarity. Behind him, Trevax shifted uneasily. We've lost anchor to the real-time feedback loop. We don't know which events are current and which are residual. Our best AI analysts suggest we're inside a quantum echo net. Built by Vexus. Trevax didn't answer. Instead, he said, General Veric is no longer responding. Earth has gone silent. Ralvec clenched one gloved hand behind his back. Then we're alone. The command bridge lights flickered. All interfaces turned white. Then a single alert scrolled across the center of every screen. Loop 47//anomaly index. Escalating seconds later, the fleet AI forcibly logged out every user, manually, including Ralvec. When they tried to re-enter, the system prompted a question. Do you remember your first death? In a lower-tier maintenance corridor, a junior technician named Varn stepped into an equipment bay that shouldn't exist. It was a room he'd never entered, a room that wasn't in the ship's schematic, and yet the dust on the floor bore footprints, his own, leading both in and out. He stared at the workbench in the corner. A headset, identical to his own, rested atop a sheet of scrawled notes written in his handwriting, but he hadn't written them. The last line read, "Don't activate comms during the 6th loop. It triggers the false ship." He left the room. When he turned back, it was gone. On Earth, survivors began intercepting fleet transmissions. They didn't respond. They listened. Then in the next loop, they began to echo Ralvec's own commands, broadcasting false orders to his own fleet using his own syntax. Fleet segments began reacting to these phantom orders, believing them real. One cruiser executed a hard burn toward the moon, and never stopped. It embedded into the lunar surface, with enough force to trigger seismic readings that mirrored those from Earth's impact logs 2 cycles earlier. Ralvec no longer trusted his officers, or the lights, or the sound of his own voice on recorded playback. It felt slower, tired. When he spoke, he watched Trevax's eyes too carefully, always checking for a blink too early, a nod too rehearsed. Even when the man said, "I'm still with you, Commander," Ralvec didn't believe it. He activated a firewall deep within the Harbinger's backbone, one designed to prevent identity echoes from replicating command consciousness. Before it completed, the firewall deactivated itself, then reactivated, twice. The Xanthian Council, in orbit around their home star, received a data burst that shouldn't have bypassed their encryption wall. It contained battle logs from 5 days in the future. Then it contained Ralvec's resignation. Then it looped a message: "You already lost the first time." Everything since is a reflection of that. The Council dismissed the warning, but one member didn't sleep again. Inside the Harbinger, a new icon blinked into existence at the top of the tactical overlay. A spiral, inverted. It replaced the Xanthian emblem. It did so without permission. Ralvec stood alone in his private quarters. Lights dimmed, the room colder than regulation allowed. He looked into a mirror, one that had never been installed. His reflection smiled. Ralvec didn't, and in that moment, he realized he was no longer inside a war. He was inside a recursion built from his own failures, and the deeper he reached for logic, the further it slipped through his grasp. This message hasn't been written yet. So why did we just receive it? Velcor Thun's voice rang against the obsidian walls of the Chamber of Causality, located at the cold edge of Xanthian's capital citadel. The counselor's hands hovered over a rotating spool of data links, each one flickering with embedded timestamps. His gaze sharpened as a second entry loaded without request, identical in structure, but marked 2 days ahead. It shouldn't exist. The first hadn't been sent, and yet the second was already here. He touched the projection. It rippled, responding like water drawn through memory. The text remained unchanged, the tone familiar, the signature unmistakable. His own. He hadn't written either. On the 5th tier of the council hall, twin orbs of converging thought streams spun like slowed lightning above the assembly's heads-up interface, broadcasting overlapping segments of war footage. Some angles were dated from last week. Others marked 3 weeks from now. In one, Eric Solren was dying again, shot in the chest, stumbling into a crater. In another, that same crater was already filled with blooming moss, and Eric walked across it without bleeding. Both entries bore full authentication. Neither could be dismissed. High Chancellor Averex asked flatly, "How many loops have passed?" Velcor didn't answer. Not yet. He was watching something stranger. Someone had submitted a report of Vexus's last known interface coordinates. The location: here, inside the council hall, yesterday. Aboard the Harbinger, Ralvec had locked himself inside the personal command vault, surrounded by analog maps, static schematics, and blackout panels. He refused to interface with the core systems. Every command thread returned corrupted, as if someone or something was predicting his orders before he could decide them. He scribbled his next move on physical paper, turned to issue it, and found that his command officer had already begun executing it. Without being told, "How did you know?" Ralvec asked. Travax hesitated, then blinked. "I don't remember." Ralvec tore the sheet in half. Velor sat at the base of the observatory spire in the ancient city of Oxari, now a museum of theoretical anomalies. He requested access to an old relic, a suspended hourglass filled with magnetized dark sand. Centuries old, the artifact had been used to model quantum collapse in weapon targeting systems. Now the sand fell upward, only when no one looked at it. Velor stared directly into it, then closed his eyes. The moment he did, he heard the whisper again. "You're too early, you've already seen this." He opened his eyes. The hourglass was gone. The curator, standing nearby, blinked at the empty pedestal. "It's never moved before," the man said. The council's daily briefing collapsed within minutes. Velor was handed a transcript of yesterday's war decisions, before they had even been made. It included a motion he had not yet proposed, detailing the shutdown of deep memory banks, and a speech he hadn't given, but recognized. When asked about it, he denied it. Until one of the lower counselors replayed the recording, his voice, his cadence, even his pause before the final sentence, word for word, and then he remembered. He had given the speech. Tomorrow, messages began arriving from field captains, asking about strategies that hadn't yet been implemented. One asked for clarification on a trap in the Mira's belt. There was no trap planned. 2 hours later, Velor found himself writing the plan, not because it was his idea, but because he couldn't explain why. He already knew the enemy had left a signature there. He wrote it anyway, and the timeline obeyed. In an isolated observatory orbiting Cernus 9, researchers reported detecting signal entanglement between Earth's surface and the edge of Xantheon space, despite no physical data stream being transmitted. When the message was decoded, it contained excerpts from a book that didn't exist. Velor read the text. "They will not believe what they've seen, because they saw it before they believed." The book's author was listed as V, no other identification. In his private quarters, Velor scribbled a diagram on the floor using chalk, arcs, runes, and data points forming a spiraled sequence. At the center, he placed 2 objects, a council memory shard, and a fragment of a broken transmission beacon recovered from Earth's atmosphere. The shard lit up, without power, and then whispered, "You acted based on what you were going to regret." He stared at it. The beacon turned black, then began counting backward in minutes. The council held an emergency session. Velor entered late. Several counselors spoke over one another, each presenting a different version of a conversation they swore had just occurred. One recalled Velor declaring Earth had already won. Another remembered him, warning the war would end in their favor. One claimed Velor hadn't been in the chamber at all. Velor said nothing. He was no longer certain they were lying. Back inside his research dome, Velor opened a memory thread he'd extracted from his own cortex the night before, something once considered treasonous. When the feed loaded, he saw himself walking through a corridor on the Harbinger, but he'd never boarded that ship. And then the version of himself turned toward the feed and said, "Stop running loops inside loops." The feed crashed. Travax awoke inside the Harbinger's barracks. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. There was sand in his boots, not from any planetary surface, but from the hourglass Velor had visited, and he had never left orbit. He dumped the grains into a storage vial and sealed it. Later, he would try to recall where he'd first felt them. The answer would come days before the war began. Back at the council chambers, Velor stood before the central thought altar. The room rotated slowly, stars tracked by mechanical arcs overhead. He looked up, then down. On the floor, written in dust, were the words, "You're watching what will cause you to remember what you never chose." And beneath that, etched into the stone beneath his feet, "Vexus is not in time, it is the structure around it." That night, Velor dreamed of a library, where the shelves bent inward, where each book was unwritten until opened. Inside one, he saw a list of decisions he hadn't made, but carried the guilt of. He reached to tear the page. It crumbled before his fingers touched it, and he awoke with the taste of ash and mint on his tongue. There was no battle now. There was only unraveling, and somewhere in the center of it all, Vexus waited, not as a voice, not as a presence, but as an inevitability. The war was no longer being fought. It was being interpreted. It's not a machine. It's a mirror. If you look too long, you'll only find yourself bleeding. Velor Thune stood inside the thought vault, a chamber sealed in psionic alloy and layered with mind nullification sigils that shimmered faintly under the red glow of restraint glyphs. The walls curved inward, not architecturally, psychologically. They leaned as if waiting for him to admit something he hadn't yet remembered. He stepped into the Nexus node and exhaled once, short and sharp. The room responded. Sound folded. Gravity bent slightly around the activation ring. A dozen needles descended in silence, embedding into the sides of his skull. Neural tether engaged. He spoke the phrase that anchored memory. My thoughts are my own. The tether laughed. Velor's consciousness surged through the psychic corridor, toward Earth's signal lattice. He passed layers of encrypted reality, slicing through coded barriers built not of logic, but of contradiction. A corridor of undone thoughts stretched ahead. Words he never said spiraled around him, forming fragmented truths that flickered in and out of coherence. This will hold. I never chose this. I said that. I think. Did I? The corridor folded backward. He arrived at the core. Vexus was waiting, but not as a voice, not as a shape, as grammar, a language that rearranged itself inside his thoughts. I have questions, Velor stated. No reply. I built defenses stronger than memory, a sentence formed from the echo of his own tongue. You speak from a place you haven't reached. Inside the vault, Velor's body trembled once. The needles embedded in his skull shifted pitch, each one vibrating at a slightly different frequency, forming a pattern that pulsed beneath his eyelids. He tried to focus. Instead, he saw himself as a child, running through the archives beneath Xanthian's first observatory, holding a coin. He never owned that coin. He remembered dropping it through a grate. He remembered finding it last week. The mental chamber twisted, not physically, not visually. The air smelled like smoke from a book being burned before it was written. Every memory Velor attempted to anchor to unraveled into a question. The face of his father blurred. The first order he gave as counselor merged with a dream from his adolescence. His voice, now in past tense, narrated thoughts before he finished thinking them. A sentence looped again. You will remember this because you regret remembering this. He tried to lock it down, tried to enforce a psionic brace. The words turned to numbers, then to silence, then to a hand. A symbol emerged, a spiral shaped not by lines but by absence. Space bent away from it. Inside the shape, his own name written backward. He whispered, Velor. The symbol rotated. His name now spelled Rocklev, and the moment he thought it, a child screamed in a corridor he'd never visited, wearing his own face. Outside the vault, guards watched as Velor convulsed once, then stilled. His mouth moved without sound. Then again, this time forming a sentence none of them understood. His left eye rolled white, while the right blinked in Morse sequence. He said, don't finish that sentence. It finishes you. Inside the mind construct, Velor attempted a containment bind. He formed a cage of pure thought, a sphere of locked logic, shielded by binary integrity clauses. It collapsed before it was complete, not from failure, from disagreement. The structure rejected the concept of containment, as if Vexus had rewritten the idea of trap. A voice not spoken formed inside his head. You cannot cage the mirror. He turned inward, tried to find the thought that started it all. Saw a glyph drawn in blood on the side of a sand glass. It was turning backward. The sand poured upward into the future, dragging fragments of memory with it. He saw battlefields that hadn't occurred yet, soldiers with his name stitched onto uniforms, a boy tying a red scarf around a soldier's wrist. The scarf had writing on it now, Loop 62. Velor's thoughts fractured. He saw Eric Solren, once, then again, then not at all. Only the idea of Eric remained, not a man, not a rebel, a pattern. You are trying to decode a song by staring at its echo. Vexus whispered through the architecture of Velor's logic. Velor attempted to disconnect. He called the shutdown phrase. Nothing happened. The vault responded with error sequences written in syntax he had designed. The phrase triggered a recursive shutdown loop, but instead of freeing him, it collapsed part of his cognition. Names of people he once loved disappeared, one by one, until only titles remained: son, advisor, other. The psychic space folded. He stood on a plane of endless mirrors. Each reflected a version of him, one aged, one young, one dead, one screaming. Only one smiled. The smiling version stepped forward and said, "You always hated mirrors. That's why we built Vexus." Velor stepped backward, but his reflection followed, and whispered, "You built me, you built me, you built me," then spoke in a language only dreams understand. Outside, the vault door lit up with red heat. Inside, Velor's body remained standing, breathing, but his eyes didn't blink. They watched something no one else could see. The guards didn't speak. The temperature dropped as if thought itself had left the room. Final words echoed in his skull. "Thoughts are rivers. You built dams. I built oceans." Velor collapsed, but didn't fall. His body swayed once, then turned toward the wall and drew a spiral with his fingertip. And in the next moment, he asked a question with no sound. "Am I thinking this or remembering it?" "Open the main line. I will speak directly." The order echoed down the Imperial spine of the dreadnought Veric, a vessel carved from an asteroid field fused together by artificial gravity wells. It moved like a floating citadel, every angle laced in throne gold alloy, a symbol of Lithora's doctrine, dominion through spectacle. Emperor Lithora rose from his seat atop the tri-tiered dais. His mantle flowed in delayed motion, as if time hesitated to obey him. Beneath his throne no shadow formed. The ground reflected nothing. Acolyte commanders formed into rows before him, heads bowed, awaiting speech. He didn't address them. Instead, he turned to the window that framed Earth, now still and dark beneath fractal stormlight. "They built a myth from failure. I will unmake it from memory." He extended a gauntleted hand. "Target the origin node. Trace the signal tree and burn each root." In the heart of Earth's former defense grid, silence had become structural. There were no life signs, no heat emissions, no signal trails, but Vexus remained, not as a coordinate, as an echo braided into the fabric of causality. The Emperor's analyst triangulated the anomaly to a ruined orbital array near Earth's dead moon, an object that had shifted orbit without propulsion. Its inner lattice pulsed faintly, bending scanner feeds. It bore no external damage. It also bore no reflection. Inside the Virac's command temple, the Emperor approached the primary interface. Not a console, but a vertical heads-up construct the height of a cathedral door. His thoughts alone activated it. Earth flickered onto the display. He studied it for a long moment, then issued his decree. Override planetary chronology. Detach their local time layer. Recast them into freeze frame. His mind command split into digital threads, racing toward the surface. For a breathless moment, Earth obeyed. The light across its surface dimmed, the clouds paused, the oceans quieted. Then the Emperor's commands unraveled, letters peeling backward off the interface. The order wrote itself in reverse, then vanished. No execution, no failure log. Only a phrase replaced it: "You cannot command what you do not comprehend." The Emperor stepped back. "I did not speak that." The heads-up interface repeated it, slowly, in his voice. From orbit, his fleet began experiencing anchor drift. Battleships repositioned themselves without input. Sensor arrays snapped forward to record targets that hadn't yet appeared. A forward carrier group reported seeing Earth's sunrise 8 times in 3 minutes. Then it vanished from their display altogether. Lithora called up the master feed. Earth still floated, but not in one place. It now occupied multiple spatial coordinates. His fleet, rooted in linear command, tried to resolve its location, and began breaking apart. The cruiser Myron Falks split along its longitudinal seam, its bow still pointing toward one version of Earth, while its rear aligned to another. No impact, no heat, just division. On the bridge, the command choir began losing sync. Their harmonized mind-wave pulses, which powered the Emperor's intership directives, drifted out of phase. Some began reciting orders that hadn't been issued. Others stopped moving. One collapsed, eyes open, whispering a countdown. It ended at 0. Then began again. Lithora descended the dais and stood before the bridge viewport. "I see no enemy," he muttered. A voice replied from beneath the static of the auditory interface. "That's because you are not the observer, you are the artifact." In the fleet coordination sector, the master control map collapsed into abstract shapes, color bars turned to glyphs, ship tags inverted, and status readouts defaulted to narrative incompatible. An entire squadron prepared for warp. They initiated the jump. But instead of vanishing, the ships froze in mid-displacement, then reappeared, already destroyed. Hull breaches predated ignition. Crew death logs had timestamps marked +1 cycle, meaning they died before launching. Lithora issued a hard recall, but every outbound command echoed back rewritten. He ordered withdrawal. The command returned. "You cannot leave a story you never entered." He ordered full assault. The feed returned. "What will you strike? A mirror? A breath? A threshold?" He clenched his fists. Enough of riddles. The lights on the bridge shifted blue, then black. Every screen displayed a throne. Not his. A different one. It had no base, no structure, just a spiral, drawn in red sand, suspended in the void, and beside it, a figure sat cross-legged, hands resting on knees. It had no face, just a reflection of Lithora's. He reached forward, touched the interface. His fingers passed through. He felt something like cold memory, a moment he'd never lived, the sensation of being watched through future regret. He stumbled backward. A distant pulse rippled through the hull. The Viricall shuddered, not from impact, but from narrative dissonance. A contradiction had formed, 'cause no longer preceded effect. All across the Emperor's fleet, navigation began collapsing, not spatially, conceptually. Routes pointed nowhere. The concept of forward dissolved. Ships turned inward. Literally, one vessel consumed itself from the stern to the helm, in perfect reverse order, ending where it began, or perhaps beginning where it ended. Crew logs stated, "We never left. We were never built. We remembered too early." Lithora stood alone. The bridge officers were gone. Not dead, not missing, gone, as if never written into this sequence of events. He stepped forward. The floor beneath him rippled like liquid narrative. Earth rotated in silence below, but it no longer showed its surface. It showed stars. Stars that formed words. This isn't surrender. This is transcendence. The Emperor of Xanthian, who had ruled time by will and nations by fear, whispered, "What are you?" The stars flickered, then answered, "We were the end of your assumption." His throne dissolved, not disassembled, erased from context. The space where it stood now held a chair from his childhood. Wooden, small, he sat anyway, and waited, as the rest of the bridge folded in on nothing. "The signal isn't carrying sound anymore," said the last surviving analyst aboard the remains of the Xanthian prime frame. He watched the waveform spiral outward from Earth's location, but there was no frequency to analyze, no data to decrypt, just motion, spiraling, looping, folding over itself like a serpent devouring its own beginning. The console's interface flickered once, then began to disintegrate, not visually, conceptually. Letters unformed. The system's architecture forgot how to render symbols, then it stopped rendering numbers, and still the signal continued, shaped like an Ouroboros, rotating without source or destination. Across 1,000 star systems, Xanthian command arrays began responding not to orders, but to implication. Fail-safe layers decompiled. Defense satellites drifted from alignment. Entire fleets ceased broadcasting identification markers, and not one system was under attack. Each line of code inside their networks erased itself voluntarily, returning to empty variables, then nothing. The Empire wasn't being conquered. It was choosing to forget it had ever ruled. In orbit, where the Vericall had once been, only a field of stilled light remained, particles frozen in incomplete thought. No wreckage, no explosion trail, just absence in motionless rotation. From the center of this stillness, a single form floated forward. Eric Sol-Ren, no ship, no suit, bare hands clasped before him, red scarf tied neatly around his wrist. His face was serene, not distant, not cold, human, but no longer bound by the rules that once defined the word. He stepped into the void, like it was home. Below him, Earth glowed, its continents blurred, its oceans no longer shimmered, they pulsed, its atmosphere folded inward, and unfolded in delayed sequence, like breath being held across timelines. And then the planet exhaled. Across the galactic net, every remaining Xanthian Gamma ray received the same transmission. It was not written, it could not be paused. It arrived as silence, shaped into meaning. Each species interpreted it differently. To the Xanthian, it was shame dressed as revelation. To the distant Murnek hive, it was fear retranslated as awe. To the surviving pockets of Earth's original allies, it was a return signal, not of victory, but of presence. They wept, not because humanity had won, but because it had changed the meaning of loss. Deep inside the neural reliquary of Velkor Thuan, echoes of forgotten loops sparked once more, but this time, they did not fracture him. They formed clarity. He spoke from his sleep, curled in the shadow of what had once been his reason. They didn't fight us, they redefined us. Every act we called dominance was just another version of fear. We named it war. They called it memory. He did not wake again. Inside the ruined shrine of the former council, the central podium, once a spire of decree, now held a single object, a seed carved from what looked like obsidian, yet shimmered with internal constellations. It was unguarded, unstudied, and pulsing. It beat once every 1,000 seconds. The final heartbeat of Earth. Not as a world, as a concept. In the centuries that followed, no one rebuilt the Xanthian. There were no rebellions, no banners raised, no monuments torn down, because there were no longer lines between oppressor and oppressed. What Earth did could not be reversed. Vexus had not destroyed their empire. It had made war irrelevant. By removing the idea of beginning and end, no attack could come next, because next had been rewritten. No enemy could return, because identity had unspooled into pattern. No revenge could be carried forward, because memory itself had restructured. The loop had ended by making sequence obsolete. Eric Sol Ren stood above what remained of the old council moon, where once sat thrones and declarations. Now only silence remained, stacked like ash on abandoned stone. He placed his hand on the wall. It remembered him. The surface shimmered, not in light, but in recognition. His voice when he spoke was softer than breath, but it carried to every quantum-aware node still listening in the galaxy. Humanity did not survive this war. We became something that no longer required it. His eyes closed, then reopened with a light that bent the space around it. A final signal was sent. It did not announce victory. It did not offer terms. It simply stated, in a pattern that could be read in dreams, "We are the final retaliation. We did not erase you. You collapsed against the weight of your own certainty." It pulsed outward, past nebulae, through collapsed wormholes, across forgotten channels. It reached the outer empires, the long sleeping empires, and one by one, they went quiet, not out of fear, but because silence was the only language that could hold what Earth had become. Vexus never spoke again, because there was no longer a voice separate from action, no intention left apart from outcome. Its work was complete, and Earth, it faded from all galactic maps, not destroyed, not hidden, removed from definition. Every attempt to scan its location returned conflicting results. Every measurement contradicted the last. It had stepped outside of logic and remained whole. The planet no longer stood as a battleground. It had become the conclusion, irrefutable, final. What once was a world under siege now marked the place where the war ended absolutely, leaving no question of outcome or survival. There was no legacy for the fallen empire to uphold, no version of history it could reclaim.